So first of all, as we begin this afternoon, it's good to see the people who are here. Let's hope some other people may come in as we go through the afternoon. But we'd like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples from whatever land we are joining this Zoom. We acknowledge their care for the lands and waterways for thousands of years, and we acknowledge their elders past, present and emerging. We also recognise that they are gathering together for the Garma Festival this week and are aware of the fact of the difference of having had the voice vote since they last gathered at Garma. And so we commit ourselves to follow their lead in working towards acknowledgement and reconciliation. And so this afternoon, we have the pleasure of Dr Kim Loo joining us on the conversation for climate change and how it will affect our family's health. And she comes from the experience of being a doctor herself in Western Sydney. And she has what was at one stage the former chair of the Doctors for the Environment of Australia and has had many other involvements. So she works constantly for Healthy Futures, and which is a network of health professions, students and supporters who take their professional values of protecting health and wellbeing in the community. And to Kim, Mari alerted us to the fact that on your organisation's website, that there is a chance for an organisation to put their names down as a supporter of the work. And Mari will do that. We'll add our name to that list this afternoon. So she's currently having a week off. So in her week off, she's come to spend this time for us this afternoon. So Kim, you're very welcome and we're very grateful for you sharing this subject with us.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. Can you hear me clearly?
Very clearly, thank you.
Oh, good. So, because I'll have a little bit of banging in the background. So I've been a doctor for 35 years and I love my job and medicine is my vocation. So the first slide is my front garden. And I've planted the garden so that I could have pollinators and small animals, birds and lizards live in the garden and sort of promote my neighbours doing the same thing. Now, Doctors for the Environment started in 2003 when 3 doctors realised that the health of our ecosystems and nature is intrinsic for the health of human health. And in 2019, which is around the time of the bushfires, the Australian Medical Association, College of Physicians, General Practitioners, Emergency Medicine, Intensive Care, Obstetricians and Gynecologists, Rural and Remote Medicine and Psychiatry all declared a climate health and mental health emergency. And if you look at the way that climate change is impacting how hot it is, you can see that with a small average change in temperature, you get more heat and extreme heat days. And also, because, the rise in heat is uneven, you get hot and cold years. Sometimes people don't recognize that there is global warming. But if you look at the trend of it, the trend is going up. And, the way we build our communities is also so important. You either have communities that can tolerate heat or you have communities that absorb the heat. And in terms of the way we look at health, the way I teach medical students is that there are multiple systems that impact our health. The first one is the biology of disease. So biology of disease is what you've inherited, what you currently have. So if there is a family history of cardiovascular disease, kidney disease, respiratory disease, cancers, anxiety, depression, just to name a few, then you're at increased risk of it, of all those diseases. And so when I look at a patient, I ask them their family history and what they currently have. Then you have the social determinants of health, where you're born, where you grow up, where you work, where you go to school, where you live, where you die. And it's like climate justice and the sort of like social justice is intrinsically related, because we know that climate change deepens social inequity. And really, the social determinants of health are largely linked to government policies. Then you actually look at the commercial determinants of health. So commercial determinants of health are large companies that actually erode the health of our population. If you look at the tobacco industry, the alcohol industry, the processed food industry, the gambling industry, the fossil fuel industry. Then you have overriding all of this is the environmental determinants of health. It's your clean air, clean water, a healthy ecosystem, stable soils, and a stable climate. So human health is really dependent on multiple systems, and you can't look at one person, one family in isolation. So this is a picture of Evelyn and her dad, Chuck. So Chuck died in the 2018 heat waves, and I'd been looking after Chuck for 14 years, and I continued looking after his daughter, her husband, and his grandson. So Chuck died during the 2018 heat waves when there were sort of days over 40 degrees, 3 or 4 days over 40 degrees. He went out in his scooter and then he died at home on a Saturday. And I was called by the police to go to the home, and it was really hard for me because I'd known Chuck for so long. And even though he had multiple diseases with heart disease and his lung disease, if it wasn't a hot day, he wouldn't have died. And this is Beck and her kids, Piper, Miles, and Lily. So Beck had Miles on the right there. She was pregnant during 2018 when it was so hot. And during the bushfires was when Miles was born. And she went back to a home that was rental home that was not thermally efficient. There was smoke inside the house. It was as equally as hot inside and outside the house. It was so hard for her having a newborn. And she said she just felt so overwhelmed by that time. She had to move to her mum's place at the time. But I had so many patients because, like we had 80 days of smoke during that time with a heat wave as well. It was so hard for many of my patients. So the next few slides are a little bit complex because I do mix around slides where I talk to community and to the health sector as well. So during heat waves, with the way you cool down when it's hot is that you move blood from the center of your body to the periphery of the body. So you sweat, and so you move blood from really vital organs to your periphery. So if you look at what are the oh, sorry.
Excuse me, Rob. We can hear Maureen talking. So would you put
Yes, I'm coming.
put yourself on mute,
Just
Rob?
mute it.
All
Just
right.
mute it. Yeah.
Just mute it. You'll be right then. Sorry. If other people like to mute themselves too, just in case there's any background noise coming through. Sorry, Kim.
Oh, no, it's all right. It's fine. That's life, basically.
So you were talking about
So I was talking about the first
Yeah.
things you might notice when you actually are in a hot place is that some people get a heat rash and small bumps when it's hot. Sometimes you can get muscle cramps. And if you walk around on hot days without drinking, that can occur. And that could be the early signs that you're dehydrated and heating. So what happens is that a lot of the symptoms that we get during heat waves are because the body heats up and because we're dehydrated. And sometimes one of the early signs also is if you're on a hot day outside, you might sweat, you might feel weak, fatigued, and nausea is a sign of dehydration. Not many people realize this. And also vomiting. And like if I was a doctor and saw someone who's feeling like that, their heart rate would probably be up and they'll probably be dehydrated. Now, what happens if you're like this? It's really important to go into a cool place to rest. With my diabetic patients, I tell them they need to check their blood sugars. People need to drink, okay, not soft drinks, coffee, tea, alcohol, water, or rehydration fluids. So what happens is that heat stroke is when it's a medical emergency. And most people who die from heat stroke are young people who are outside. I would say a recent study done by the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare found that the people who died from heat waves were the over 65s and men between the ages of 24 and 44. So men between 24 and 44 are the people who tend to die of heat stroke, whether they're working in an outside place, like there were soldiers who were stationed to do military drills outside in the Northern Territory, and they've been recorded deaths because it was so hot and they were not provided with enough water. There are people who've gone on bushwalks during hot, and I recently went on the Larapinta Trail, which is in Northern Territory. People have died on that trail because they didn't take water and didn't take account of the heat. So that's people like that die from heat stroke. But when you look at the risk for people who are older, it is to do with complex problems, multiple medical problems, and just being in a hot environment. But if someone has a heat stroke, it is a medical emergency. So now who are the most people at risk? So if I look at everyone, if it's a really hot day, or if it gets to days over 40 degrees, everyone is at risk. If they can't get to an adequately cool place, have water and cool down. But the people most at risk are people who are isolated and poor and homeless, people who are over 65. Children have a larger surface area and they can get more dehydrated more rapidly. So kids have to really stay inside and keep cool on very hot days. Pregnant women are at risk, and we know from studies now that if pregnant women actually are exposed to many days of heat, it impacts on their growth of their babies and they can have premature deliveries. Now, those with pre-existing medical conditions like heart disease, respiratory disease, or kidney failure are more likely to be at risk as well. And people with mental illness are more likely at risk, and sometimes it's due to their medications. And outdoor workers who have no control on whether they can, the time of starting and whether they can take a break. And school kids, because kids sometimes will play outside and forget to drink. And so there's medications that can interfere with the ability to cool down as well. So there are some medications that can interfere with sweating, the thermoregulation, can reduce your thirst, or cause dehydration, reduce kidney function, or aggravate heat-related illness. Now, some medications used for heart failure, for anxiety, depression, can actually be in that group. So it's really important if you're on any medications to talk to your doctor to say, what do you do when it's really hot with your medications? So what do I do as a general practitioner when I take a history from a patient? I always take a medical history. I take the social history. Do you live alone? Are there people around you can contact if there's an emergency? I always take a financial history as well now, because you don't know who's living in energy poverty. That means they can't pay for their energy bills, or if they're living in food poverty, they can't afford fresh, nutritious food. So it's really important. And I always ask, does your home, can you get warm on a really cold day, or can you get cool on a really hot day? Because this tells me how safe people's houses are. And I always ask people whether they've got somewhere cool to go to on a hot day if their house gets hot and they can't actually alter the house. And now the mental health impacts of heat, I go through with my patients' mental health about the impacts for them. Going back, so with mental illness, because we know that the mental illness impacts of heat are can be more devastating than the physical impacts sometimes. Part of it is because it disrupts sleep. We know that heat waves increase the incidence of domestic violence. You just have to ask the police. We know that people who are isolated with mental illness can be some of the medications used for depression and anxiety can also alter your ability to sweat. People with reduced fitness are also at risk if they have mental illness, and there's an increased rate of suicides with heat waves. And from recent studies done in New South Wales, we know that even slight increases in heat waves to 28 degrees and humidity increases the risk of self-harm with young teenagers. Oh, now this is Heat Watch, which is a little app that I could show you guys how to download because it gives you advice on what to do during hot days. It's freely available. It's a research project from Professor Ollie J at Sydney Uni. And this sheet is research paper from Sydney Uni because they were trying to find cheap ways, evidence that people can use on hot days if they really are poor. So all these because there's so many myths and old wives' tales about how to cool down, but this sheet is actually the evidence way of cooling down, and it also gives you guidelines regarding your age and your circumstances on which cooling technique to use. So it's a very important information sheet. Now, also I wanted to talk about air pollution from the extraction, transport, and combustion of fossil fuels, because air pollution is really significant in Australia and it's really underestimated. And air pollution is like a big soup of different particles. You've got the particulate matter and you have the liquid aerosol particles. And with these particles, this is PM, which is particulate matter, and it's measured in, there's about 80 ambient air quality monitors in New South Wales, and they measure different size particles plus aerosols. And so if you look at PM 2.5, which is 2.5 microns, it is tiny. And they've done a very elegant study in UK where they looked at gold particles the size of 2.5 microns and got volunteers to inhale it. And they actually collected the gold from the blood tests and the urine. And when they imaged, they could see it went everywhere. So this is why there's decades and decades of study on PM 2.5. And that's a class size. So you can get, if you have PM 2.5 from a bushfire, house fire, factory fire, you can breathe in really toxic particles. And the PM10, which is larger particles, if you guys remember the 80 days of smoke, those are the particles that lodge up your nose and get into your sinuses. Now, this is the headline from research from Melbourne Uni. And they estimated about 11,000 people die from traffic pollution each year. You can look up that paper. And also there's decades and decades of studies to show that if you live near a highway or really, really busy road, increases the risk of dementia, cardiovascular disease, and strokes. And not only do we have outside air quality, we have indoor air quality as well. And we know that combusting gas on your cooktop actually also causes air pollution and increases the risk of asthma in kids by 12% and also sensitizes kids to house dust mite allergy. And this is a project about how to not idle cars in front of children. So it's a project started by Claire Walter for school children. Because if you look at little kids, they are about slightly higher than the tailpipe of a car. And children have a larger surface area in their lungs and they breathe faster. So if you expose a small child to air pollution, like from a car, they actually get more air pollution because they suck more in. So with Idle Off, we're trying to discourage parents from idling at school pickup. And if they can turn their car off or just park further away and walk to their child. And this is just a few things that we can do at home: reduce, reuse, upcycle, recycle. This is my chook house that's made up of upcycled materials. And this other things you can do: eat less red meat, grow your own food, and farmers market. And I prescribe nature because we know that people who walk in nature improve their blood pressure, reduce their anxiety and depression. And other things you can do: you can move your bank accounts to banks that don't invest in fossil fuels, arms, gambling, and the list goes on of all the harms, commercial harms for health. And so the two banks that don't are Bank Australia and Bendigo Bank. And also with superannuation, there are superannuations that don't invest in the commercial determinants of health. And you can look at your insurance as well. And you can email companies and tell your friends when you actually leave those companies. And things you can do for further advocacy is write to your local member. If they write to you, reply, and organise meetings to talk to your local member about things you care about, because they have to see you. And this is our New South Wales core members of Doctors for the Environment. Hey, that's the end of the slideshow. Okay. Hello.
Hello.
So,
so if you can get out of the slideshow now, then we'll be able to see each other.
oh, okay. So I'll just get out the
Just
slideshow.
stop sharing and we'll be able to see each other.
Okay, so we'll go share. I will go, let's see, can we stop share? Okay, does that work?
Not yet.
Oh, really?
You are viewing, so if you go up the top where it's saying, it's telling me I'm viewing your screen. If you go up there, it
Okay,
should
wait.
say,
Okay, we'll
cancel.
stop. Okay, stop share.
Now we're right.
Okay.
We're right. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Kim. In a way, I'm sorry I told you to stop share because there were so many fabulous
I know.
bits of information that it was all going zoom, zoom, zoom. And,
Oh, sorry, did I speak too fast? Because sometimes I don't.
You didn't
speak a
speak.
bit longer.
You didn't speak too fast, but you could have left the slides on so we could have read them. And,
you can have the slides and share. You can share the slides.
We can share the slides.
Now somebody needs to go on. We're getting feedback from somebody if you're not on mute. So Kim, and people might invite you to go back to there, but we thought we'd just have a little bit of time for people to think, well, what are the questions that we've got when we have somebody with Kim's expertise here? Just have a moment to think about, and if you're sitting next to somebody you can share with, you might have a conversation together. But what is it? Was there something that you'd like Kim to talk more about in terms of part of me, Kim, wants you to go back to a whole lot of those slides and say, can you talk more about those? But we might see if people have some conversation first before we get into that. Nice to see the others that have joined us since Kim started too.
You can put questions in the chat if you want to.
Yes.
Ask the question, Anne.
Yes, thanks, Mari.
I was just wondering, when you talked about the pollution,
Yep.
the heat and everything, is there much research as Dutton talks about nuclear power?
Oh, okay. Nuclear. Because it's a distraction. Nuclear is a distraction, because if we know that with renewable energy, we have enough if we support it and scale it up and get the interconnectors, that we have enough to actually power the whole of Australia. And the thing is, even when they talk about small modular reactors, they don't exist at the moment. We don't actually have the workforce to build it. I think at the moment there's also a moratorium in all the states, and it is a distraction because it's so expensive. If you look at it, it's something like 5 times more expensive than wind and solar, batteries, water. And with batteries, the technology for batteries is really accelerating because like at the moment we're using a lot of lithium batteries, but they're looking at sodium, nickel, and cheaper materials to make batteries out of. So, I mean, a lot of this, if you look at the energy sector, is so important for us to draw down on the use of energy to start off with. So drawing down is really things like making more thermally efficient houses so that it doesn't take much to heat or cool them, because most people spend the most money on making their house thermally efficient. I mean, I spent years when my parents just told me to wear more clothing, and I still do that. But look, because if you can actually, if you own your own home, you can actually just put, I started with planting trees in the right places and putting blinds in from Bunnings, as I started off really cheap because I couldn't afford to do everything. It was all sequential. So, you know, if you make, and you have sort of like insulation in your roof, you have seals around your house, like, you know, those little snakes that we used to use that I remember when I was a child that you put against the doors. So if you make your house more thermally efficient with the simple ways, and there is a really good book by Tim Forsey, My Efficient Energy Home, that goes through all of that. So there is a lot of information how to make your house more thermally efficient to start off with. So you use less energy heating and cooling. So
Kim, I was thinking more of, like, you know, when you're talking to people and you want to debate it. I was just seeing you've been talking about the health effects of like pollution and coal and car. Say that if we went nuclear, is there a health defect with it?
Okay, the health, I mean, if it's in a stable place, there is still, if you're using it to make energy, it's still the storage issue with the nuclear waste. I mean, it's really to find a place, because, you know, Lucas Heights is our only little power station, and they store all their waste in one small area. But the amount you use for doing all the medical imaging is tiny. So they can store in a place. But when you actually run a power station, there is a lot more waste to store. And who wants this? Like, the trouble is, no one wants nuclear waste in their backyard. No one really wants a nuclear power station. So I'm not sure whether the moratorium will be lifted because no one wants it. Who lives in that area. And the fact that, because if you look, they've actually looked at this, the CSIRO has looked at this, it's going to be so much more expensive. We've got the technology now to actually just accelerate the wind and solar. It's just, there is so much disinformation, and we know where the disinformation is coming from about wind. I mean, it doesn't kill birds. It doesn't cause you to have worse tinnitus. There's no medical evidence that, I mean, I should say killing birds, airplanes kill more birds than the wind turbines, but it's, there's no evidence it causes any medical problems. And the wind turbines now, okay, the old wind turbines you couldn't recycle, but the newer wind turbines are made out of materials that you can recycle.
Thanks, Kim. Other questions? Mark Hinchy?
Can't hear you, Mark.
You're on. Here she comes.
Yeah. Thanks, Dr. Kim. I wondered, have you got any research or anything more information on like the coming summer that we're facing and summers after that, and the effect in particular areas, like now you're Western Sydney, out in the west, as many of us are, and you were mentioning, I think it was a temperature of 41 or something.
Oh yeah, no, because we had,
so what are we facing?
Okay, so the modelling has been done. If you look at there's on several government websites. The easiest website to look at is probably New South Wales website, and they have the modelling. The modelling is there on the website. The scientists have done it, and it shows that if we looked at the number of hot days in the future, they're going to be longer. We're going to have longer heat waves with higher temperatures. But I can send you specific data from the government website. Just we're going to have longer, hotter summers, is basically what those websites are telling us. So yeah, so there's scenarios that they look at is if we do nothing and continue as business as usual, we're going to be facing very high temperatures. If we actually even reduce our temperatures now and do all the right things, with the baked in emissions from the last 20 years, it's still going to get hotter before it gets cooler. But if we do, so it's the science, like I'm not a climate scientist, I'm just repeating what the climate scientists tell me. But I can see the impacts on my patients of the heat waves that we're having now.
So I found those stories you had about two of your patients really confronting and saying to us what actually happens to people, you know, and when you named those people like the poor and the elderly and that pregnant woman, and like I think this is the kind of thing that we need to be aware of. The people for whom we have the most concern are the people who are going to suffer, whose health's going to suffer most from this increased heat.
So what we know is there is a really good book that was written by Eric Kleinberg, who's a social anthropologist. I loaned the book out. And he looked at the Chicago heat waves, because Chicago wasn't built, and it was in sometime in 2014 or something. But they didn't have houses that were built for heat waves, and something like 400 people died in Chicago during the Chicago heat waves. And they looked at the communities that were poor. They found that the Latino communities had higher survivability during heat waves than the Black community. And the reason was that they had the social infrastructure there. Social infrastructure is where you have connected communities, they have a shared space that's cool, and they basically are connected. So connected communities survive heat waves and other disasters. So what we know about that's why social cohesion is so important. And like really being prepared for disasters. Okay. Because the thing is that in a way, we've always had drought, flooding, rain, and heat waves in Australia, but we've never really truly been prepared. And I can tell you now that during the 10 years of the other government, they took the money away from the National Health and Research Council, away from research about climate adaptation. They just took the money away. So for 10 years, we had no research. It was just terrible. Now there's money going back into research, but there's a 10-year vacancy of money for research. And the Climate Change Authority was disassembled before, but now we've got a climate change authority. And we've got climate and health unit within the Department of Health. But this is only since the last election.
Kim, could I ask another? We're talking about heat waves, but I'm really conscious of how cold it is in Sydney at the moment.
Oh, yes.
And when you were talking about gas, and I'm wondering, and you were talking about how the live gas flame and how that's not good for people's health. What about people who have gas heaters?
Okay, now if you have an unflued gas heater, you're getting basically breathing all the combustion of the gas. If it's flued outside.
Yep.
Okay, so unflued is really unsafe, and there's still unflued heaters in primary schools in New South Wales. So the cheapest way to heat and cool is with a reverse cycle air conditioner. And again, it's a thermally efficient house, and fans are useful up to a certain point.
Are there other questions from other people, please? Wave your hand or just jump in.
I was wondering whether there'll be a death rate with the Olympic Games. Like, it was interesting that the coach died and he was 60 with a heart attack when he came in from being outside. So it'd be interesting with this extreme heat they're having day after day over there, what effect it will have on people. I know they called an emergency meeting yesterday to try and work out something about it.
Oh, look, they should have plans like my friend Professor Ollie J, who's the professor of the Heat Incubation Research Centre in Sydney Uni. He's done a lot of the research regarding the physiology of heat. It's world leading research on it. And he does the heat plans for the Australian Open and a lot of the ball codes, Cricket Australia. So a lot of the sort of elite sports have got a heat wave plan. And so I'm sure they must have a heat wave plan in the Olympics. What I worry about is amateur sports where they don't necessarily have a heat plan. And like I always ask my patients whether they have a heat plan at work. Because if you have outdoor workers who work for a company who don't have a heat plan and they're outside scaffolding and doing everything else on the roof, it's really dangerous. Because even if you drink and you're on a roof and it's like a 45-degree day, it's still dangerous. I've got a few of my patients who are roofers who actually help me do media because I've had one patient, he's been a roofer for about a long time, he's 55, and he says his shoes have melted on a black roof. So it's like where you work, how you work, even cleaners who work in hot buildings when the air conditioner's turned off. Now, remember mopping the floor and the air conditioner's off and it's so hot.
Kim, I think Marilyn had a question. I noticed you unmuted yourself, Marilyn. Did you have a question?
Well, it's like, what are we doing about fossil fuels? What are we doing about getting carbon into the soil? Trees, they're knocking down trees more than they plant them. Those sort of things are the cause of. And plastic, everything you buy is covered in plastic. All of that has a bearing on the outcome of the heat.
That's right. So in terms of what is happening, there are people working in each area. Like in Doctors for Environment, we've been asking about the Stop Fossil Fuels for ages, but our next campaign that we're launching in 2 weeks is the health fossil fuels are a health hazard. So that we're launching that in Canberra with Jed Carney, who's she's the Minister for Health under Mark Butler, so like Assistant Minister for Health. So she's being their launch. We're seeing politicians. I've been seeing politicians since 2015 about all this stuff. So, but the trouble is the fossil fuel companies have really captured both major parties. So it is, and there are good people within Labor, and I know all the independents and the Greens understand. It requires all of us, civil society, to give the big push. So I mean, like there is a lot, because I've done webinars for the other part of the Catholic Church, St. Vincent's, St. Vincent de Paul, and I've done Uniting Church. So there's the Australian Religious Response on Climate Change. So really,
we sent them a message.
So it requires really civil society and really corporations who are ethical corporations to push. And so in terms of like, that's why the transition is so important. And that's why, like, the more people you talk to about how important having clean energy is, the better it is. I mean, but having said that, clean energy requires mining as well. So like you need governance over all of these things so the workers in those areas are protected. Like they didn't really protect, all the people who worked in coal weren't protected. So many of them ended up with health problems because they didn't have the right governance over their work sites and work practices. So for future mining, they need good governance over it. And it's really important that all of us, and this is why unions are important, to actually keep an eye.
I'm waiting for Tanya's Prevasic to start on soft plastic.
Okay.
Was a time we could take all of that to the shopping centre and put it in a bag there. But all of that has stopped. And
so there are companies that are taking soft plastics. After Red Cycle went away, but like I'm still saving all my soft plastic. You know, the trouble is also we kind of need a circular economy. We need to have products made so it's not a linear. It has to be so that people who, I'll give you an example. With Michelin tires, what they did in France was that when they sold tires, old tires came back to them. So weren't tires going to waste. So and all of you know about obsolescence. Like I've got a Breville food processor I've had for the last 25 years, but you buy a food processor now, it's probably going to have an obsolescence date, all your white goods. So it's to actually also have all these companies that make white goods also take back their products to recycle. The same thing with the phones. So because there are people advocating this area because a lot of electronics have everything stuck together, so it's hard to recycle. So if they actually, because glue is cheaper than screws, so even in cars things are stuck together. In my computer I'm using, things are stuck together. So there are people actually advocating not to stick electronics together so you can pull them apart more easily. So it's
also a really good program to watch was last Sunday's Landline. And they did a bigger, a circular economy. And it is a dairy farmer who started it. And the whole valley of the Bega are working towards an economy that will go round and round and round. And so that prevents landfill and the heat out of the landfill and old ties. It's everything.
Thanks, Marilyn. That was a great example of the circular economy.
It was excellent. Yeah. And you can still get it on iView. So it's worth advertising and getting people to realise what can be done.
Yes.
And I was so delighted to see it.
Thanks, Marilyn.
I'll just say that remember the days before plastics, because I've been working for 35 years, so I can say, happy to say I'm turning 59 this year. So I remember the time before plastic, and you guys remember the time before plastic. I remember at school when mothers used to re-knit jumpers for the next size up. So you're reusing the wool. So we know how to actually do it. It's just to take a step back and look, and people used to value clothing. Like I'm funny because I've been wearing this jumper for everything I do, and every time someone sees me on a webinar, I'm wearing the same jumper. But it's just, you know, just to value the stuff you have, and there's so much. This is why I hate shopping. You see so much stuff that is just made, but people not necessarily buy.
No, it's just.
Thanks, Kim. Thanks, Marilyn. Cess, you unmuted. Were you wanting to ask a question?
Sharon wants to. Yeah.
Thanks, Sharon.
Oh, hi. I'm after Kim mentioned about working or being in too hot condition. It's encouraged me now to find out if there's a code of safety when it comes to my grandson, who's 12. When they were playing cricket this season, it was just too hot. And it was the middle of the day. But the fellow in the other team insisted that they play another hour. And it was really far too hot for those boys to be out there. So is there a code? I must find out.
So, you know, because I've actually spoken to Minister for Education about this. I really need to follow it up. It's really hard. At the moment, there isn't. There's no, because you've got, there's Sun Smart, but there's no Heat Smart in any school. So in a way, people are following their, or in sort of amateur kiddie sporting clubs, and people are just following their common sense. But the trouble is common sense kind of goes out the door sometimes during that point in time. Unless the club actually seeks guidelines, there aren't necessarily guidelines.
Good. Okay.
Thanks. And what you were saying before, Kim, that there is in the professional sports, but does it trickle down to the amateur sports as well?
No, because it can't. Because in a way, it can't trickle down because these are really regulations. It kind of needs to be spelled out really in black and white. But I think because, you know, it's different humidity and heat. And it has to actually look at that, both of those things as well, because if it's humid and it's 35, it's really dangerous to be outside. No one can survive outside because it's harder to cool down when it's really, because you can't lose skin, moisture from the skin when it's really moist already outside. So humidity compounds heat, the impacts of heat waves. So it's, I've said to, because I talk to kids at school and see what their school's done. So this is an area of advocacy at the moment still. One of the organised, the task force I'm in is the, there is a Greater Sydney Heat Task Force where they've actually got the Department of Health, sort of large building firms, and 3 universities and 3 primary health networks and local health districts to look at a framework to at heat and all the gaps there are in the framework at the moment. So this is still in a process of being organised. So really the children's sport is one area that we actually are kind of looking at, but we haven't actually had a chance to do much about.
Mark, did you have a question? No, sorry, I thought you were unmuted. Yes, you can stay unmuted. Was there anyone else who had a question at this stage or a comment from following up?
I was just going to say, in schools, like when I was at a Quaker school, Hill, the school there decided with the heat that their big lunch, instead of being at 12:30, came at 11 o'clock.
Yep.
They then had a fruit break in the classroom a bit later, and then they had what was little lunch later, but for about 15 minutes. So they, and if it was an extremely hot day, there was no play in the playground and children were kept inside. So I think a few schools are very aware of the
one kid, their school turned on the sprinklers on the kids and then they sprinkled them and they sat in the shade. So that's another way to do it.
I appreciated the fact, Kim, that you said that we could have your slides, which I've got, of course. So it could be worth like us putting them up as well as showing the as well as showing your talk, to actually have the slides separately as well, so that people who want to go back to those slides are able to do that. We'll see if we can do that. Yes.
Because I know I put a lot of information there, but you know, it's really, as even if you talk to your children, your grandchildren, your friends, I think there's still an underappreciation of heat. There's certainly an underappreciation of air pollution. That's why the Idle Off program is really important, to make parents aware of not idling near a crowd of people or children. The gas cooktop thing is a really important one as well, because like I said about kids with their asthma and sensitization to house dust mite, but if you have heart disease or lung disease, you're still breathing in air pollutants from your cooktop, and it contains particulate matter and aerosol air particles as well. So like I've got an induction cooktop, which is I've had it for 5 years now, and I do because I work with the also because I'm chair of Asian Australians for Climate Solutions as well, and we're trying to actually educate the Asian population that cooking on an induction cooktop is just as good. And we're also trying to improve health and science literacy. So I do cooking demonstrations. So it's so next time we're doing fried rice, fried noodles and dumplings for a bunch of elderly Chinese people in the community. So it's to show that the transition is possible and doable.
Thanks, Kim. We've got Marg, Hitchy, and then Cecily.
Oh, okay. I was just going to ask about heating the home with the slow combustion wood burner. What's because my daughter and son-in-law have got that. I'm just wondering, you know.
Okay, now this is an area of advocacy too, because what comes out of the burner actually goes into the air that people breathe outside. And I realized that because I work in Riverstone, and when I drive through Vineyard, on winter, you can't actually see the road in front of, I can't see the road in front of me because it's so covered in air pollution. So, and people do die from the air pollution from wood burners if they live in an area where there's wood burners and they can't stop the smoke from coming inside. It can make people's asthma worse. If they want to find out how much air pollution there is inside, they can actually buy a monitor. I'll show you. Okay, this is like a monitor. It's an air quality monitor, and it can monitor particulate air pollutants, aerosol air pollutants, and they can see how much is coming in the house. They're smaller units than that. So it is really hard because it is an equity issue when people are poor and they're living in say in remote or rural. See, remote or rural, and when you're away from other people, there's no one next door to you to breathe in the smoke. But if you're in an urban area and there's lots of houses using wood burners, then the air outside the house will be polluted.
Mark, sorry, Kim. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh no, so it's a matter of perspective. In Victoria, they did actually ban. What they did was that if you sold your house, you had to get rid of the wood burner. But I think that they finished doing that 2 years ago. So it is difficult, but you know, people need to be educated that, you know, the last thing you want to do is harm your neighbour.
Yeah, that's right. That's all we say. Kim, I was wondering about in your research, and when you mentioned before about the need for us to speak to, whether it's our children, and just to share even some of your slides and talk about it with people to change behaviour. I think sometimes we sort of straight away turn to government and say they got to do something, but there's a much bigger issue for us individually, isn't there, in a community, to take on what we have to do to change behaviour. And I was wondering, when you talk to groups, do you think that there is a real change in people's trying to do things differently? And
I do talk to Rotary. I've done a couple of Rotaries. I do talk to, in a way, the people I talk to who actually come to the talks I do want to do something.
Yes, that's
right. It's the others that we want to get.
I mean, I did give a talk to a Rotary group. I don't know whether they actually, the person who actually asked me to speak, wanted the rest of her Rotary group to understand. So I think they understood about heat, but you know, it is sometimes also what capacity you have to change and what resources you have. So I don't want to guilt people out to say that, you know, you're not doing enough, or but you know, you do what you can. And it's really, because I find that it's, you know, in a way, the most powerful person, the person you can influence the most is really the people who are close to you. And so like I know with my friends, because when we go out for dinner with my friends from high school, because I still see my friends from high school, I think we're all eating less meat now. A lot of my friends have moved, because one thing you can easily do is to move your bank. If you move your bank and then tell all of your friends, I moved my bank because of this. And, you know, superannuation companies, there are superannuation companies funding arms. They're going to basically, like, for war. Well, I know. And so you really want to find out what your super is funding as well. And how do you find out? There is a website for Market Forces that looks at this. I'm just going to get a drink of water.
I'm just sitting here absolutely amazed, in case you can still hear me, but I'm sure you all can, as all the things she's involved in as well as being a local GP in a local community. And one of the other things, she saw Wagga on my email address. So she actually went to high school in Wagga for a couple of years. she told me in one of our conversations. Yes. So I was just saying to them, Kim, you're amazing me about all of these organisations you're involved in, as well as being a full-time GP in one of the harder areas in Sydney. And that's one of the things that strikes me is, once again, it's the poor who become the victims of this, isn't it? Like it's harder for them to get the proper cooktops. And what they're saying, you know, I think even the idea that there should be a rule about not putting gas stoves into new homes that are being built.
Because it's actually it's easier for like the apartment blocks if they put induction in, if you talk to the builders. And you know, it's and gas is becoming more expensive anyway.
Yes.
It is. So like induction is really super easy to use and clean.
Yes. So it's from two aspects, isn't it? It's from the health aspect as well. I actually happen to have a gas cooktop and a gas heating, but it's really choosing to try not to use those things, just even for your own health.
And it's expensive, you know, it's expensive to transition.
Yes, that's what I mean, yes.
So like I've had one thing that my efficient energy home does is you can turn off your gas, and there are induction cooktops you can buy for $50 from like IKEA or Wood Guys. And you can try that, even using an air fryer or Sunbeam fry pan that you just plug in. Now, those are ways that you can, like I've got a Sunbeam fry pan I've had for 25 years, so I still use. So there are other ways you can actually cook besides using the cooktop. Look, at the moment, like if you get your gas removed, you still need a plumber, and the disconnection fee depends on your energy provider. So it's still a hard ask, but you can do things that reduce, like if you have good ventilation, then that's important. The trouble is the gas cooktops actually emit air pollutants even when they're not on. So I mean, it's really important you actually make sure your gas heater is fluid as well.
Yes. And any other questions or comments from people? Thanks, Joan.
Mine's mainly a huge thank you, Kim, and all who organised this. I'm a Victorian presentation, and I do a lot of work in schools and with sisters and other people. And I'm all fired up. I'm going to make sure that our representative on ARC, Barbara Daniel, has those slides and takes them to our ARC meeting. She's full of it. So I'll get her to watch it. I'll also make it available to our sisters and staff and some school people. But what I really want to do with it is I work with schools, with students a lot, and I've got quite a few school gigs coming up, and we're looking at good practices in terms of slavery-free practices. And immediately I've worked out how to wave into a lot of your slides into my talk in terms of domestic violence, climate change, that I can wave into the ACRAC one. So I'm just absolutely thrilled to bits that I said yes to coming here. So, and I'm not going to use my gas stove ever again. I've already worked out alternatives. I've got an electric oven, so that's the end of no more gas. Thank you, Kim. Thanks, everyone.
That's all right, but Idle Off would be good for the school, because Idle Off, you look at Idle Off, you go to the Idle Off website, there's a whole practical thing for primary schools and sort of experiments for schools already on Idle Off. It's actually the whole program is for schools.
All right, this is secondary I'm talking about. Will you repeat again what the website is? Because I need to...
It's Idle Off. Actually, I'll find it and pop it in the chat.
Pop it in the chat, please.
Yes.
Because I really would like to have that with me, because I've got a workshop for 4 weeks with a big group of students, and we're going to be looking at action. So thank you.
Joan, and when you get the slides, it was one of the slides that Kim had too when she was talking about getting parents to turn their cars off rather than idling.
Oh, I've got it. And I live opposite a school too, so I'll
Okay, so I've
teachers
just put
about that.
I just put the link for the idle off to the chat. You can have a
Great.
look.
Thank you.
And
Idle off,
yeah, and so with the gas thing, we're actually working through each council, talking to each council about gas. And there is the other thing, there's a global cook safe coalition where with professional chefs who've actually come off gas and are using induction. So there's a lot of advocacy in this area. We're up against a very big commercial determinant of health, which is the gas industry.
Yes, it's the commercial.
Yeah. And all of this is still a social justice issue because really the poorer demographic in Western Sydney are the ones who sometimes don't have the resources to do much. And so that's why this is why the systems advocacy is important, because we need better bus stops, better public transport, more walkable areas so people can actually walk outside. And sort of like, the trouble is with heat waves is the social isolation. Yes. So if you stay inside during a heat wave, you're not really interacting with your community. Yep. So it's really the social fabric. This is what I worry about. It's the social fabric of society with all this extreme weather. Yeah. Unless we actually make steps to actually fund things better, because funding has been taken away from community groups. Because I'm also part of the Riverstone Community, Northwest Community Services, and they work with people from flooding, because I've had patients flooded 4 times in 2 years. And so flooding isn't something I didn't talk about, but flooding is terrible. Because like it takes so long to recover from flooding. And all the diseases you get from the water, and this has really happened in the poorest area of the electorates where my patients come from. Yeah. And we're eking out, really that organisation that helps with the flooding in my area is eking out funding from our primary health network. They've had state money taken away from them. So it's like, where does money go? Like money is so needed in the community, and it's one more submarine. Sorry, this is my, it's like.
You've probably got people totally supporting you here, Kim. Yes.
It's the people, like the people here, like our humans and our animals and our trees and everything. It's so important to protect nature and protect humans. And it's really all our voices are powerful if we actually work together.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. I just feel so encouraged even by your words. I must say there has been a big attempt, has there not, from Western Sydney councils to plant trees. Now, yes, when you look at photos of the roofs from 20 years ago and now, because we just know the difference the trees that are making to cooling an area.
So there's a Million Trees program, which is from the last government. Right. So each council has an allocation of trees, but it's also educating the population. Because Doctors for Environment did a joint research project with World Wildlife Fund, and they found that only 25% of people understood the importance of trees. Because if you don't have trees, the soil is not as healthy. You don't have the insects and the birds and the wildlife. You don't have the ecosystem. But it's educating the population, because when they planted trees, like trees this big, people were pulling them out. So now in Western Sydney, they're planting like decent sized trees. So it's visible. And they've done studies to show if there's someone who looks after the tree, like a hero for the tree, then that tree is more likely to survive. Right. So you can't really, it's like anything else, like pink bats or anything. If you're going to roll our program, the government knows, because they've been told by the experts, it's a good thing. But you need to educate the community to say, this is a good thing, because these trees we're planting are really important to cool the area down, to make places more walkable. But you almost need to talk to each resident about it. So to find a way of actually communicating with the whole community that these are important things. And that's why, like having a group that can infuse its information out is so important.
Yeah. And that's where all of us are responsible in terms of, as you say, talking with our families and neighbours and things like that. Yes.
And
yes, Sess.
I don't know if this is appropriate at this moment. Our next seminar. We're just negotiating with the Climate Council of Australia at the moment.
Yeah.
Asking for Professor Leslie Hughes.
Oh, she's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To speak to us about extinction of species, including humans, as a result of climate change. So that's happening hopefully late October or November, just depending on the date.
No, she's a really good speaker because she's actually a researcher. I'm a clinician where I'm translating the information from the researchers to my patients.
Which is why we wanted you. Sorry,
just leading on, Professor Leslie Hughes has just released a video on methane, which would be very related to what you've been saying. So you probably, if you go onto the Climate Council website.
Yeah, no, it's all right. I give talks because with extraction of gas, you can see methane from every point, from the point of extraction to transport, because the Australian Conservation Foundation actually went around with the methane camera and looked at and followed the trail of methane, because methane is 20 times more potent than carbon dioxide over a 20-year period. So this is why gas is bad. It's not natural gas.
Mark Barclay, this time.
Thanks, Kim, very much. The presentation it took me back to my early childhood. I grew up in Sydney. Like, you might have a couple of really, really hot days, and then you had the big southerly buster. But that with climate change, that doesn't happen. But what I really want to comment about is the connection. I do know that with the heat and domestic violence, and for us, particularly in the Southern Hemisphere, where we've got Christmas around that time, and that brings a whole lot of other pressures on families, and then credit card debt and things like that. So the kids are home, you've got the heat, and you've got people staying indoors, and then the whole impact of Christmas.
And alcohol.
And actually, that's the other thing, alcohol. So, and then the kids go back to school after that experience with a whole lot of other change, with teachers and things like that. It's got all that other aspects, got so many different layers to it, the impact of climate change on families.
Thank you.
Did you want to make a comment on that, Kim?
Yeah, it is really, because when I saw the systems thing I did at the start, it's the commercial determinants of health impacting on the social determinants of health, impacting on the biology of disease. So the whole thing is, that's why I'm cognizant, that's why it's so important. And I'm trying to encourage, because I teach medical students and trainee doctors as well, about the systems approach to thinking about health. Because if you don't know where people live and what social situation they have and their housing, you can't really look after them properly.
Yeah. It's the whole person, isn't it? As part of the whole ecosystem. Yes, seeing the world as bigger. Look, Kim, thank you so much for the time and all your work you've put into this. And Mari's just going to say a few words of thanks on behalf of us all. Thanks, Mari. Just unmute yourself first, Mari. Unmute, Mari, thanks.
I think a few people have been saying that thanks to you, Kim. But one of the things I was thinking as you were talking, we often think of climate change, and we are mainly looking at what's happening outside. So climate change, how it affects the environment and all of that. And I think what you did was saying that it's a holistic picture, that you can't isolate, that it's a whole community, what's going on outside with the weather, volcanoes and all that disruption, but it's also what's going on within every person. And I thought you were so clear, easy to follow. I enjoyed, a bit like what Joan was saying, how you were talking about the things in the house. I wouldn't have thought of those things. I thought that was very clear. And I must admit that idling the car certainly got me. I suppose at times we do idle the car, and I don't think I've ever thought about what pollution comes out, especially now when you don't so much see the pollution coming out of the car as once you used to. So, yeah, I'd just like to say thank you for the the whole presentation. I don't know if there's many doctors, Kim, who would do that sort of a questionnaire thing that you do with your patients, with looking at the family history, the medical history, their finance, all that you look at each person as a whole person that has many dynamics operating on them. I mean, most of my feelings of a lot of doctors is they just want to treat whatever you got wrong with you when you go in. So I congratulate you on that sort of presence to your patients. But thank you very much for a very clear, and I look forward to seeing the slides again, presentation.
Yeah. Thanks, Mari. And thanks, everyone, for coming. And on behalf of CCJP, Kim suggested any payment we had that goes to the organisation from which she's been speaking today. So we'll ensure that that happens. And Cess has already advertised our next one. And Kim, thanks for saying that we could. Kim was very happy that we record this so that we can share it among our friends. So it'll appear on the webpage, hopefully before the end of this week. So I don't need to add thanks, Mari's done that, but thank you to the rest of you for coming. And we know there are a lot of people who intended coming who didn't get here, but hopefully they'll be able to watch the YouTube when it goes up. But thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye.